Welcome to Inside Hawaii Real Estate. I'm Will Tanaka with my co-host, business partner, and wife, Leonie Lam.
Thanks, Will. Together as full time realtors, we're bringing you the latest in Hawaii real estate. And today we're going to be diving into hot and relevant topics shaping Hawaii's real estate market in 2025. There's a new administration. There could be immediate effects. There could be effects over the next several years. So we have a lot to cover. First, we're going to be talking about Oahu's housing market trends.
Okay, so Leonie, the question is, what is the current state of the market? Is it still the seller's market, the buyer's market? People are asking all the time.
Yeah, so we actually still believe that it's more of a balanced market, but inventory is low, especially when it comes to single family homes in neighborhoods. And, right now there's just about 780 fee simple single family homes active on the market, but there's a ton of condos, almost 2,000 active condo units are on the market for sale right now. In addition to that, when you look at the market of actives, at least, around at least 30%, in some cases much more depending on the neighborhood. There's been price reductions, and so you're seeing that a lot more price reductions, and sometimes you're seeing multiple price reductions, so not just one, but a lot of price reductions on certain properties, especially when it comes to condos. Median sales prices, they're remaining fairly strong. I would say we're still over a million right now. We're at 1,054,000, for single family homes. And then the highest point we were at was in 2022 during the pandemic, and we were at, what, over 1.1, 1105. And it kind of reduced in 2023, but it rebounded back to 1.1 million last year. And so we'll see where we end up, in 2025.
Right, and cash buyers and investors still continue to dominate certain price points, especially in the luxury market. And that's one of the hot topics of 2025, Hawaii's luxury real estate market, because even with all the economic shifts, fluctuating interest rates, Hawaii's luxury market still remains strong, driven by limited inventory, high demand, and global interest. But at the same time, we find that there's a lot of local buyers in the luxury market as well. In terms of the all cash dominance, like for example, we had a Diamond Head listing, we had multiple offers. That one wasn't all cash, it was mostly cash. We recently closed on a Kahala home where we had six offers, and three out of the six were all cash. So, and then the other three were still conventional loans. In terms of the trends and insights, I think it's still sought after for high net worth buyers and investors. Kahala, Diamond Head, Napali, Haveo, Wailupe Circle that we're talking about, Kailua, and certain parts of North Shore. So, is there anything to add, Leonie?
I would say that in terms of those, we're talking about the luxury market, and there's, in at least for our experience within the single family realm, luxury areas, we haven't had as many foreign buyers coming through. It's been primarily local investors or local buyers. Would you agree?
It has been, yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
and even recently, Victoria Ward, the new Kaka'ako luxury condo,
Mhm.
probably there was a good number of local buyers, buying it cash, and some people are already trying to flip it. Um, that's the first row in Kaka'ako. It's a really nice building overall. It's on the smaller size, but with that said, I mean, it's still, people are buying luxury condos like they did with Waiea and Anaha.
Okay, so regarding policy and regulation changes that we're paying attention to right now, do you want to talk about some of the, I guess, national as well as local policy changes that we're looking at?
Absolutely. So I think under the Trump administration, he's mentioned tariffs where possibly 10% for all global imports, 25% for Canada and Mexico imports, and up to like 60% tariffs for China and some other Asian countries. So I think that's going to really affect the construction costs, which we'll get into a little bit later. Locally, affordable housing is always a top of everyone's mind. New developments and zoning changes. Recently, one of the hot topics was the Empty Homes Tax Bill 46, where it's aimed at addressing housing shortages by imposing additional property taxes on residents that's vacant for more than 6 months. So it kind of either forces you to like rent it out or pay an additional tax. Last December, that tax or that bill was actually deferred by the city council until a fiscal study, is completed sometime this year. So we'll see what happens, but that's going to be another hot regulations. And we just did an open house in Waikiki. There's a lot of visitors from Canada. Well, obviously because of the weather, Washington State, New York, and some East Coast states. And one of the more common questions is short-term rentals. So what they want to do is they want to potentially buy a property in Waikiki, live here for maybe 3 months out of the year when it's colder in Canada, for example, and then rent it out for the rest of the 9 months. So one of the more common question is, can I do short-term rentals on Oahu? And yes, but it has to be either in a resort zone area. There's some exceptions, especially in Waikiki. So if you think about Waikiki, there's the main Kalakaua Avenue that where the major hotels are situated. Then there's Kuhio Avenue. So anything between Kuhio Avenue and the ocean, pretty much you could think of it as a resort zone where you could do Airbnbs, hotel operated units, short-term vacation rentals. And then from Kuhio to Alawai Canal, generally speaking, that's apartment zoned. Off the top, there's only two buildings, the Waikiki Banyan and Waikiki Sunset, that's allowed Airbnbs and short-term vacation rentals, even though they're in a apartment zoned um, area. So I think in terms of when you purchase short-term vacation rentals and there's, most likely you're gonna have to hire a property manager. So there's gonna be additional costs because if you're doing long-term, now usually the property management fees is about 10%. When you do short-term vacation rentals, anywhere from 20 to 30%. And if you do hotel operated pools, which is, I mean, you just kind of pay for it, you pay the fees, and then it's just operated like any other hotel. So that one, it's not gonna be as much of a cash flow because they take about 50% or more in terms of the actual income. So there's a lot of research that you have to do if you're thinking about short-term rentals. And I think one of the more common things is short-term is defined as anything under 30 days. So a lot of the investors or people who are considering Hawaii as their second home, they're looking at more of a midterm rental unit. So depending on the building, it's definitely by law, it's going to be at least 30-day minimum. You go all the way to Kailua, Bluestone. It's a really nice townhome association. Their minimum is 90 days, right? So you would have to rent it out for a minimum of 90 days. So that would be considered midterm rental. So a lot of opportunities, a lot of different options, but you have to do your research and make sure that you comply with the law. Because back in the 80s, you could have applied for a non-conforming use certificate, or you had these special certificates, but there's not very many out there. So, and those will rarely go on sale. I mean, they're gonna keep it within the family. So short-term rentals, yeah, that's another hot topic.
Yep. And that's a good point about the additional carrying costs when you want to look at buildings that have short-term rentals because the property management fees are a lot higher. Or if you put it into the hotel pool, then you're definitely going to be giving away a lot of your profit. So factoring that in when you're considering investing. And that being said, there's a lot of inventory. So the one way that you might be able to negotiate is on the sales price because of the plethora of inventory, especially in an area or neighborhood like Waikiki. There's a lot of condos for sale there. So, a lot of opportunity for someone who's looking at investing. But factoring into that, the added cost of potential assessments because our condos here in Hawaii, as we all know, are aging. And so there's a lot of significant repairs and everything needed for buildings. So just need to be well informed when you're looking at it. But there is a lot of opportunity right now for a buyer. Or
That's
for
right.
investor, yeah. And then another hot topic would be financing, just generally. So the normal seasonal trend of mortgage applications, it typically increases in January because people are coming out of the holidays, they're making their plans for the year. So we did see that jump up last week, in fact. So mortgage applications were up. And the interesting thing about that were it was up just like it normally is, seasonally. However, if you look back over the last couple of decades, significant activity, this month so far. So we're kind of track on that and see what that's going to translate into. And then the national average for mortgage interest rates, today is at like 7.04%. So that's up from last week. Last week it was like 6.93. And then last year around this time, we're looking at 6.66. So interest rates are currently up a little bit again. And then, proposals from the new administration that could impact inflation, which impacts interest rates, the tariffs and trade policies, tax cuts, fiscal policies, Federal Reserve independence, the privatization. So I think there was mention, this morning about the privatization of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So that's super complex and it would be hard to completely privatize it. I think that if it was to happen, or at least reform, which is probably more realistic, if they were to reform that, then likely we could see fluctuating interest rates. We could see higher interest rates, and definitely, if there was a reform, it would probably create higher credit scores needed or larger down payments for the consumer, which is going to make it more challenging for a first-time home buyer to qualify and or low-income borrowers as well. Here in Hawaii, jumbo loans, because the cost to buy a house, our median sales price is over 1 million, right? So jumbo loans are a little more common here in Hawaii, but it might be even harder to get one in the future, depending on how things go with the new administration. And that is because it would require stricter lending criteria than it already does. So
That's
then
right.
buyers might be looking towards more creative options or creative financing. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on that.
Absolutely. And in fact, this past year, there's been an increase, an uptick of creative financing. And what I mean by that is, for example, purchase money mortgage, where the seller becomes the lender and the buyer retains or gets legal title to the property, but the seller, just like paying a mortgage loan, but you're paying it directly to the seller. Another way is it's called the agreement of sale, where the seller retains legal title to the property but and the buyer has an equitable title. So what they do is the buyer would pay interest only payments, typically anywhere from 1 to 3 years, maybe up to 5 years. 5 years is a long time. And there's a big balloon payment to pay off, and you would satisfy the agreement of sale. And then after the big balloon payment is paid off, you as the buyer would get legal title to the property.
Can I just ask you a little
Yeah,
bit about the purchase money mortgage and agreement of sale options? Like if someone was thinking about doing that, if you're thinking of selling your home or you're
yeah.
thinking about purchasing one, how does that get set up? Like, is that through like a regular lender, or do you have to have an attorney kind of make that structure for you, or how does that work?
It would be highly recommended, strongly recommended, that if you're gonna get into a transaction where it's gonna be seller financing, either way, purchase money mortgage or agreement of sale, that the parties retain legal counsel to facilitate the transaction. Because on the sales side, if you are doing agreement of sale, and let's say that you're a non-resident, it's called the Hawaii Real Property Tax Act, 7.25% withholding that could apply. So how does that apply in an agreement of sale transaction, for example? I mean, you definitely need to get professionals to draft the documents and help facilitate it. So you know not only the real estate aspect of it, the legal aspect, there's also going to be tax consequences for the buyers and sellers. So absolutely.
And then for those types of financing options, then you would still have like a seller's agent and a buyer's agent, realtors representing both sides.
That's right. Yeah. So that's very common. And then it's even more common for those to get an outside counsel for each party. Kind of moving on to another hot topics, Hawaii's hidden gems, these underrated neighborhoods. Let's talk about that. That's a little bit exciting.
That is exciting. Yeah. So, what do you think would make a neighborhood a hidden gem?
So it would be a hidden gem because it's more affordable than some neighboring areas.
Mhm.
There's greater potential for appreciation, and it's just a really convenient area. Access to schools, shopping center, where people want to move into, but maybe they're not as familiar with it because they didn't grow up in that particular area.
Yeah. So, if you're thinking about an underrated area in town, then the first one that comes to mind would be like Pololo Valley. That to me is an
Okay.
underrated neighborhood. I feel like it's underrated because there are certain parts of Pololo Valley that probably would not be as desirable for a homeowner. But if you're looking for something in town that is, a lush valley that has pretty nice weather as compared to other places, because you get like a gentle mist, every day. There's really good valley breezes and everything. And then it's just generally pretty decent typical lot sizes, 5,000 plus. And so that neighborhood would be one to look at because it's more affordable in terms of looking at all in town neighborhoods, I think. I feel like
Yeah.
people don't always look at that, but we're starting to see more people looking at Palolo Valley as an option.
I think that's a good point. I think there's a certain perception Palolo because of low income housing in certain aspects of Palolo. But I think overall, I mean, over the years, especially during COVID, it's has become a hidden gem for many first time home buyers, people upgrading from condos to single family homes.
Or
I think
investors looking to remodel.
the next one, there's a so-called hidden gem, or it might not be a hidden gem anymore because people have seemed to found, this neighborhood. But let's talk about that because we had a listing a couple of years ago. It's very close to shopping centers and it's a great location. So, what was that neighborhood called?
Oh, so you're talking about Ali'i Shores in Kanyohi?
Yep.
Yeah. So we really liked Ali'i Shores and Kanyohi. When you think of Kanyohi as a place that you're going to be looking at. Some people have perceptions about it, but I think that Ali'i Shores was very interesting neighborhood because its proximity is, like you said, right across the street from Windward Mall, and but it's kind of outside of the hustle and bustle, and it is off a main highway. So the homes that front that highway have noise. You can hear street noise, but streets within there are very quiet. Plus, you get like bay views, and then a lot of them a lot of the homes there may have access to Kaneohe Yacht Club, which is another added benefit if you're looking for something like that. So, from a pricing standpoint, I think that is one, depending on what your price point is, there's opportunity, within that neighborhood that people may not ordinarily consider.
And I think another one is in Aina Haina in East Honolulu. Again, this one maybe it was a hidden gem a while back. It's one of the best places to go trick or treating with the kids. It's called Wailupe Circle, right across the street from Ainahaina Shopping Center. It's a small, secluded peninsula community, single entry point. It's not gated, but it's a quiet, private feel. There's a boat dock. There's a pier where you go fishing. It's a great surfing spot. And each lot is at minimum 10,000 square feet. So if there's a property where you're willing to do some work, maybe you could get it for a deal. But I think people have kind of found this neighborhood. But just wanted to mention, just in case you're passing by Ainahaina Shopping Center, and you're like, huh, that would be a nice neighborhood. And
Yeah.
yeah, any other ones, Leonie? Any other hidden gems, or people are asking, yeah, where's a good place? Where could we possibly see appreciation?
Well, I think there's been a lot of activity within Kalihi Valley. So Kalihi
Mm,
Valley has its stigma, also similar, but even more so than Pololo Valley, right? There's public housing and, it has definite stigma about the type of neighborhood that it is. However, up in the valley, there's some nice places, nice lots. Definitely again in a valley, so you get pretty good breezes and lush green and everything. And I feel like in there, homes are there's a lot that have been fixed, some that are not, but there's definitely some streets that are more desirable than others. But I've seen a lot of activity, or we've seen a lot of activity within Kalihi Valley, and so that makes it another sort of hidden gem, something that you wouldn't ordinarily look at, but depending on what price point you're in, that might be a good option, if you're not looking to go out west and you want to stay in town.
yeah. Okay, that's a good one. So those are the so-called hidden gems. Maybe no longer hidden gems, but those are one of our, some people's preferred neighborhoods. So just wanted to share that with you. Now, another hot topic is the Hawaii's permitting process. So it's just been a hot topic, for example, you know, to build a new home, to get permits for it, it could take a year and a half to 2 years. People who want to renovate, I mean, that could take a year. So it's been a frustrating process. The good news is that, we had an awesome opportunity to interview Christina Jedra of Civil Beat. Apparently, the DPP, the Department of Planning and Permitting, they have a new system. And they have a new, I guess, process in place. So things should be moving a little bit faster, meaning that even the review process. So oftentimes you submitted a permit application and it would sit on the desk for months. Now it might be a matter of weeks before they start reviewing it. They're not going to approve it in weeks, but at least the initial process of reviewing it, that's going to be a lot more expedited. So I think we'll see by the end of this year, we'll be talking to contractors and homeowners and our colleagues just to see where it's at. And because usually for permits, what are some general guidelines that you would require a permit that you have to apply for it?
Well, I think, obviously, if you're going to do new home construction, so if you're buying a vacant land and you're planning to erect a new structure, for sure, you're going to need a building permit. And then a lot of times our clients ask us about renovating, what requires a permit and what doesn't require a permit. So I think for the most up-to-date information, we always point them to, Department of Planning and Permitting. They have a website that really clearly defines what needs a permit and what doesn't. But I
Yeah.
think what clients have been very surprised to learn is that if you're replacing like for like things like kitchen cabinets, for example, or flooring, and those don't require permits. But typically, if you're touching anything electrical, plumbing, if you're changing a window, if you're moving door or changing the configuration of the floor plan, for sure you're going to need a permit. That requires one anyway.
Right, right. Another thing to consider is if you're purchasing a house or you're thinking of renovation, what people don't often think about is what flood zones. So if you're in a specific flood zone, if it's X, then you don't have to go through the additional process. But if you're in flood zone AE or VE, either close to the canal, close to the ocean, um, then there could be an additional process. Um, I mean, there's all these departments that the one permit application has to touch. So I mean, always kind of expect, waiting as long as possible, unfortunately, but you just have to work with, a good contractor, a good architect, draftsperson, and we're going to be hoping for the best. So I think over the next 6 months to a year, we will definitely know if the DPP application process has improved.
Yeah, and you mentioned our other show that we did regarding, building permits, Department of Planning and Permitting. And obviously, if you are looking to buy a house that doesn't have permits, then the risks that you run are going to be fines, legal issues, if the property was renovated and it should have gotten permits, but it didn't. So there's a lot of risks that buyers need to be aware of in term when they're looking at
Yeah,
homes that have been so-called flipped or upgraded without permits if it required them.
that's right. And earlier today, uh, President Trump was inaugurated, and he didn't specifically talk about the tariffs. I mean, he in terms of percentages, but he has talked about it in the past. And in terms of importing goods from China and other countries, building materials like woods, plywoods, engineer woods, hardwoods. I mean, there's a lot of materials that's being used here to build new homes to do renovations. So something like a 60% tariff would make these materials significantly more expensive, right?
One
And
thing
then
that comes to mind when you're saying that is, I think a lot of cabinetry, like kitchen cabinetry and bathroom cabinetry are imported, I've seen.
that's right, yeah. And then a lot of furnitures from we'll see, how it affects Indonesia and Bali, but there's a lot of nice furniture from there too. So I think with a potential shift to domestic suppliers, in some ways that's great, right? I think I remember one of our clients imported cabinets from Washington State. A little bit more expensive, more quality, but it's going to be interesting to see if the local lumber producers could actually keep up with the increase in demand, because then there's going to be a supply demand issue, and again, increasing costs. I mean, that's exactly what happened during COVID. The supply chain was really significantly affected. So I think, especially how it's going to affect Hawaii. I mean, we depend heavily on imports, heavily, right? I think nearly all of the construction materials are from Asia or from the US mainland. I mean, of course, I wish we could, use koa wood, but I mean, you're not going to use that to build homes. I mean, that's going to be for nice furnitures. So, um, then how do you balance that with the affordable housing initiatives? And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the private construction projects versus the public initiatives, how are we going to balance that?
Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind, like you just kind of said, was, there's a lot of these new development projects that are on the horizon. A lot of them are condominiums and, even there's some single family projects that we're hearing about. But how is that going to happen? If these construction costs get out of control, and will they be able to obtain and secure their construction loans?
Right, right. So I think
Interesting
that's some,
to
yeah,
watch.
yeah. So that's something that we might not know immediately, but
Mhm.
over the next year or two, I think things are going to start rolling out. And I think under the Trump administration, because he himself is a real estate investor, my understanding is that he's proposing to give tax cuts to incentivize real estate developers and investors. So that's going to be interesting to see if he does continue with the tax cuts for I guess, for lack of a better word, for the wealthy, for the developers and investors, if that's gonna increase more spending.
Mhm. Hmm.
And in terms of the potential impact on the Hawaii real estate market, then who knows how the affordable housing, which is really not affordable at this point, that they're more for the middle income, but to see if it could shift that, to see if there's an actual real solution that everyone's working on um, to make it affordable for the low income to the mid tier family members. So that'll be very interesting to see.
And then just at a local level, this is did you see that the legislature is trying to sort of help the whole hurricane insurance situation and the building insurance that a lot of condos are suffering through right now?
I think that's going to be huge because, you know, I think every association and every condo building had, and probably every homeowners, their insurance increased this past year, without a doubt. Some had to increase their HOA fees by anywhere from 10 to 20%. So that really impacted the owners. And and a big part of that was because of underinsured. The hurricane insurance was insufficient. It was too expensive. So a lot of these condo buildings never obtained, full insurance for that.
So it should be interesting to see if our government is able to put in, some kind of help or relief efforts. I think they're talking about bringing back the hurricane fund, or I'm not sure exactly. There's some solutions that are proposed. So we'll be closely watching that this year because it's very impactful to owners of condos and potential buyers and sellers. It's affecting, everyone in terms of condominiums in Oahu, on Oahu,
Yeah.
and I think in the state too. I mean, just generally, it's tough.
And then finally, you mentioned earlier, you talked about the privatization of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Right.
So that's they're government-backed companies that you could kind of think of it as like a recycling system for home loans. They buy old loans so that the banks could buy or make new ones,
Yeah.
helping the keeping housing market stable.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking if that's gonna be privatized. I'm not sure. I think you had mentioned mortgage interest rates may increase. Right now for conventional loans, in order to sell it to the secondary market, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, I mean, it's very stringent compliance regulations, right? I mean, it's got to be down to the T ever since the 2008 crash. So
Right.
if that became privatized, are they going to loosen some regulations? Are some bigger banks and lenders, are they going to be more favored towards the smaller ones? And is that going to just create 2008 all over again? This is going to be interesting because one person can't make the call on to privatize. I mean, it's going to take the whole legislative side, but it's going to be a very interesting 2025.
It is. And again, I think that when it comes to the privatization issue, I don't know that the government would fully be able to privatize it. There's just too much involved, it seems like. So reform though. And so what is the reform going to be? How is it going to be restructured? And what are the impacts from that going to be? So that's something definitely to watch closely.
So that's the top 10 hot topics in Hawaii real estate in 2025. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Aloha.
Aloha.